Filmmaking is a massive, cumbersome process that involves oodles of changes as movies are conceived and produced. The endings specifically often go through all sorts of versions, sometimes just in the script, but also to the point where entirely different finales are shot, only to be switched out before release. So let's check in on some of these discarded denouements. First up, we gotta bring up one of the more timely examples, what with the first live-action Morbius on the horizon and a new Blade incoming. At some point. In the landmark 1998 Wesley Snipes vampire butt-kickin' undead sunscreen extravaganza, our heroic vampire killer slapped down some awkward CGI, turned down the offer of a cure, and continued his hunt in Moscow. Now, this was of course long before we had a big ol' interconnected Marvel Cinematic Universe, but that didn't stop a nice little sequel tease, with the one and only Morbius, as played by director Stephen Norrington, showing up on a faraway rooftop, much to Blade's apparent chagrin. This was unfortunately cut, and it only took us a little over 20 years to get some gosh darn payoff. At the end of Terminator 2, the ending certainly gives a lot of sequel possibilities and, as it turns out, a much more mysterious tone than was originally planned, wherein we fade to future Washington, D.C., presented in terms I can best describe as the 90s. We get old age makeup Linda Hamilton, adult John as a US Senator with a family, and a much more hopeful look at what was to come. Which, yeah. Could we just reinstate this one, guys? The ending of Donnie Darko is also pretty hopeful about the future, minus one little detail. Donnie himself is killed by the jet engine that he narrowly missed waking up to in an alternate timeline. In the slightly alternate ending, we get a more definitive finale for Donnie, complete with a very gory impalement as the camera glides through his bedroom. It was felt that this just didn't fit with the tone of the ending, and so it was cut. Jordan Peele really got us good with the ending of Get Out, in which Daniel Kaluuya's Chris escapes a permanent vacation in the sunken place, and in a final moment of vengeance, nearly brings himself to kill his girlfriend. Ex-girlfriend? But he can't find it in himself just as a police cruiser pulls up. Uh-oh, thinks the audience. Are we about to see a super depressing ending? Nope, it's just comedic relief slash best friend ever slash TSA agent Rod. Huzzah! But that wasn't always the ending. In fact, the original ending does have the cops showing up, but they don't shoot Chris like you might expect. Instead, they simply arrest him and he's taken to jail, where he's unable to adequately explain what went down, suggesting that he's probably going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Peele decided the film needed a bit less of a downer ending, so they reshot it and gave the TSA their best press in years. Alien has a pretty mixed finale. Sure, Ripley defeats the xenomorph that killed her crewmates, and she escapes with Jones into cryosleep, but as we now know, she winds up being woken up to some, less than thrilling news and 2 movies worth of horrific nightmares and, nihilism. Well, 3 if you count Clone Ripley. Anyway, director Ridley Scott had pitched a different idea to 20th Century Fox. What if, instead of surviving, Ripley is brutally killed by the xenomorph after failing to kill it, and then the darn thing takes on a human voice and starts piloting the ship? Man, that's some real Alien 3 energy right there. Sylvester Stallone made a name for himself with the Oscar-winning Rocky, which he not only starred in but also wrote. Rocky tells the story of a down-on-his-luck boxer given one last shot at his dreams when he's given the opportunity to fight the current heavyweight champion, Apollo Creed. In the end, Rocky goes the distance, and while he doesn't defeat Apollo, he does last through the final round and only loses due to a split decision, proving himself a real contender. As he shouts, "Adrian, I did it!" I shouldn't do that. I feel like even that's offensive. His true love runs over and they embrace. Freeze frame, love and perseverance win the day, roll credits. But that wasn't the original ending in Stallone's script. Instead, he had wanted Rocky taking a bribe to throw the match. After doing so, he uses the money to open up a pet store for Adrian, which, I guess is its own kinda romantic thing, but also not exactly the iconic tale of perseverance that we've all come to know and love. Say, we mentioned Alien 3 up top. Would you enjoy a heaping pile of nihilism and rain in your detective thrillers? Well, you probably just love David Fincher's 1996 breakout hit Seven, a film Roger Ebert called, quote, one of the darkest and most merciless films ever made in the Hollywood system, and which has a twist so messed up, I'm specifically prolonging this sentence just so you can hear me talking about it and skip to the next entry if you've somehow never watched this flick. All right, ready? Okay, good? Cool. So, in the final film, Brad Pitt's newbie detective Mills straight up murders Kevin Spacey's John Doe after the latter orchestrates the delivery of Mills' wife's severed head to their location in the middle of nowhere. Morgan Freeman plays Detective Somerset, who is basically your standard one day from retirement character through the lens of Andrew Kevin Walker's Dark as Black Ink screenplay, and he pleads with Mills to not do it. But Mills succumbs to the sin of wrath and, well, kills Kevin Spacey, which, you know, back in 1996, that was actually pretty shocking stuff. Anyway, in one of the two versions written by Walker, Somerset goes one step further and shoots John Doe himself. His reasoning? He's retiring anyway, and by doing so, he saves Mills from being swallowed up by the darkness rapidly stripping him of his humanity in this horrifically nihilistic world. Doesn't really solve the dead wife, though. The Godfather Part 3 might not be as iconic as its predecessors, or as good for that matter, but it's still the concluding chapter of one of the most critically acclaimed sagas in film history. So, when director Francis Ford Coppola decides he's gonna recut and re-release that sucker, you bet your buns we're gonna take a peek. This is also a bit of a cheat for this list, since this is a new alternate ending, but whatever. I just want to talk about some Godfather. Where the original Godfather Part 3 ends with Michael Corleone slumping over and dying alone in a chair as an old man, The Godfather Coda, The Death of Michael Corleone, we'll work on that title, guys, deletes this ending, leaving his fate open to our imaginations. But Coppola's own judgment is in plain sight. Okay, this is a quick but wild change. In Stanley Kubrick's landmark dark comedy Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, our narrative ends with, well, the end. A rogue military plane drops a hydrogen bomb complete with decorative Texan and triggers a nuclear apocalypse as the Americans, along with a Russian ambassador and the titular scientist, fight and bicker in the Pentagon's war room.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
The original concept, however, ended with the war room descending into a different kind of chaos as the participants engaged in a massive pie fight, ending with the president and the ambassador sitting on the floor, covered in custard, singing "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow." Kubrick decided to cut the scene because the actors were visibly enjoying themselves, and if there's one thing that Stanley Kubrick doesn't like, it's actors enjoying themselves. Speaking of Kubrick, his 1980 take on Stephen King's The Shining also has an alternate ending, although this one was far less expensive. After we see that Jack's frozen to death in the hedge maze, we cut to a hospital where Danny and Wendy Torrance are recovering from their traumatic experience at the Overlook Hotel. They're visited by Stuart Ullman, the Overlook's manager who hired Jack in the first place. He explains that there's no evidence to support what they say happened at the hotel, offers to let them stay at his home, and finally gives Danny a tennis ball, the same one that rolled out of room 237 earlier in the film. After he leaves, we get the famous shot of Jack in the photo at the end. This ending would have given us a slightly better idea of Ullman's understanding of the supernatural forces at play, but test audiences weren't big on it, and, at Warner Brothers' suggestion, Kubrick cut it and had the footage destroyed. Ridley Scott's sci-fi classic Blade Runner has had an interesting release history, with multiple cuts causing quite a bit of confusion for the average viewer. In the theatrical version, we get a happy ending wherein Deckard and Rachel escape LA and drive through a more natural environment. It's confirmed here that Rachel doesn't have the 4-year lifespan of the other replicants, and so we basically get a happily ever after.
I didn't know how long we'd have together. Who does?
Anyway, that ending wound up being the alternate ending since in 1992, Scott released a director's cut that became the de facto release until his final cut was released in 2007, both of which nixed the narration and that happy ending in favor of a more ambiguous finale. Going way back, 1939's Gone with the Wind almost had a very slight but also very significant difference. See, in the final film, we get one of those great quotes that is often repeated in my household.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Rhett leaves, having realized that Scarlett loves Ashley here, and Scarlett returns to Tara, saying, "After all, tomorrow is another day," while we, the audience, are left to wonder where these crazy kids might wind up down the line. In a different version of the script, Scarlett basically begs Rhett to come back, which, while a very small change, would leave a big impression on audiences as to the resilience of her character. First Blood, aka the first Rambo movie wherein Rambo doesn't even kill anyone, ends with Stallone's John Rambo being talked down by his former commanding officer and taken into custody after raising hell and making the local cops look like total chumps. In the original ending, however, as in the book it's based on, Rambo is killed by Lieutenant Troutman. Well, Rambo helps him pull the trigger, but tomato tomato. Stallone himself suggested the change, and director Ted Kotcheff agreed that it worked way better to have Rambo survive. In the original 1932 version of Scarface, Tony Camonte is killed when he tries to run from the cops. However, censors in some states at the time required a less violent ending, and so director Howard Hawks had to bring in a body double for star Paul Mooney and show Tony surrendering, getting a trial, and being taken to the gallows and hanged. Hawks wound up fighting the censors, and in at least one happy ending on this list, won. National Lampoon's Vacation is an absolute comedy classic, but the much-loved finale at Wally World almost didn't happen. In that ending, Clark Griswold buys a BB gun and forces a security guard to take his family into the closed park, only to wind up with Roy Wally himself, confronting them along with a whole SWAT team. However, Roy feels for Clark's need to make his family happy and lets them enjoy the park as his guests. Happy times. However, that ending is a reshoot, done after test screenings of the original ending failed to enthuse audiences. In this version, Clark and his fam never enter Wally World, instead taking that BB gun to Roy Wally's house, where Clark forces Roy and his guests to entertain them. The police show up, but a deus ex machina arrives in the form of Christy Brinkley, who Clark's seen on the road throughout the film, and convinces her dad, Roy, to let him go. Luckily, we got the ending that better resolves the movie's themes, gives us some theme park action, and doesn't involve a home invasion. In Kevin Smith's breakout movie Clerks, life basically just goes on as normal by the end of the film.
What kind of convenience store do you run here?
However, in the original cut, the Quick Stop gets robbed and Dante's shot and killed. Actor Brian O'Halloran hated it, and Smith only included it because he didn't know how to end the movie, so it wound up cut and later included on the DVD. Die Hard with a Vengeance is considered by most to be the second best film of the franchise, with the nagging flaw that the ending doesn't really hold up too well. It's not awful per se, but it definitely feels like a messy afterthought. However, it is a more chipper, fun finale compared to the original ending, wherein John McClane's life is left in even more tatters than at the beginning after Simon Gruber succeeds in his plan. Yep, bad guy wins. But John isn't done with him just yet, and winds up tracking Gruber down and, through the world's most explosive game of Russian roulette, killing him at close range with a small rocket launcher. It's another much darker ending left on the cutting room floor, although in my opinion, it's the better option. But I'm also a bad person. Oh look, another somber as all heck ending. Army of Darkness famously ends with a Deadite showing up to get served by Ash at the S-Mart.
Hail to the king, baby.
But the original ending had him drinking too much of the potion used to help him sleep through the centuries and return to his own time. And well...
No! I slept too long!
Okay, like, are all these gonna be dour as heck? George Romero's zombie classic Dawn of the Dead ends with the two survivors escaping by a helicopter into a world overrun by cannibalistic corpses, so already a pretty bleak finale. However, in Romero's original ending, both wind up killing themselves, with Fran starting up the helicopter, and as the dead approach, she jumps up and decapitates herself with the helicopter blades. And as if that wasn't mean-spirited enough, the helicopter engine then dies, meaning they wouldn't have made it out alive anyway. Hear that? Even the vehicles die in this film. As long as we're talking zombies, real quick, 28 Days Later has a few alternate endings, all of which feature our main man, Jim, dying. In one, Jim is taken to and dies in a hospital, bringing him back to where he started the story, which, yeah, still not happy. Oh, come on. Okay, in I Am Legend, Will Smith winds up sacrificing himself to save some strangers who take his cure for vampirism back to their little colony. Cool. Thing is, I Am Legend is based on a novel by Richard Matheson, wherein Dr. Robert Neville discovers in the end that the vampires are now the dominant form of life, and to them he has become something of a boogeyman. He's the monster. He realizes that he is legend. It makes a lot of sense of the title and is a pretty grim finale, one which was basically shot for the 2007 film but abandoned for the more hopeful, redemptive version we wound up with.
Feed me.
Does it have to be human?
Feed me.
Ooh, classical musical comedy Little Shop of Horrors? You bet your buns there's a darker alternate ending. The original version and how the stage version ends features Audrey and Seymour dying and Audrey 2 taking over New York and eventually the world as more plants just like Audrey 2 pop up and demand blood. All right, Paranormal Activity. Okay, here's one that's at least equally dark between versions. In the cut shown in wide release, Katie kills Mika and throws his body at the camera before lunging at the camera herself with a freaky demon face straight out of a 2007 YouTube video. In the festival cut, Katie kills Mika and returns to the bedroom where she sits down and rocks back and forth, and then some cops show up. Katie regains control of herself and one of the cops accidentally shoots her. Ah, crud. You know what? That's also worse. Okay, but like, that's gotta be it for the sad times, right? Oh, all right, this one. One of the darkest films Ashton Kutcher ever starred in, The Butterfly Effect tells the tale of Evan, whose childhood was beset with tragedy, and he realizes that when he reads his childhood diaries, he can go back in time and take over his younger body and change what happened. Unfortunately, he's in a movie called The Butterfly Effect, and so things go horribly wrong. As a last-ditch effort, he goes back in time once more and stops himself from becoming childhood friends with those he's trying to help, taking himself out of the equation, but also able to continue with his own life. In the original ending, he goes back in time to before he's born and strangles himself with his own umbilical cord, which, while super metal, that got dark. Okay, guys, we gotta end this on a happy note. How about a comic book movie? This one, Guardians of the Galaxy. What you got for me, James Gunn? Okay, so Guardians of the Galaxy ends with a montage, and the alternate version includes the Collector and Nebula, but they were cut because they were bad guys and didn't fit with the joyous tone Gunn was going for. Okay, that's not so bad. Oh, and Grandpa Quill was cut. And he had a photo of Peter and his mom, and he was looking up into the stars, and the idea was that he saw Peter abducted that night, and he'd been waiting all this time, and I'm not crying, you're crying. Man, alternate endings sure are full of sadness and death, huh? Well, there's plenty more sad face emojis to go around. Did you know that one of the proposed endings to Return of the Jedi included the death of Han Solo? George Lucas opted for the happier conclusion we got, but even Harrison Ford wanted it to happen, which, I mean, no surprise there. I'm just happy he eventually got his way.